Michelle Phan is a world-famous makeup artist who became popular on her YouTube tutorial channel. We've all suffered from a bit of nostalgia at some point, a sort of sad longing for days gone by. If that sounds familiar, you should count yourself lucky it's the 21st century. Just a few hundred years ago, says The Atlantic, nostalgia was considered a mental illness treated by everything from shaming to being buried alive. One of the things thought to cause nostalgia was eating strange, unfamiliar food, and it makes sense. She is yet one more reality celebrity who has found a massive audience through this online venue. There's a reason that familiar staples are called comfort food, after all, and food connects us to not just others, but to our past, and especially to our childhoods. She has an estimated net worth of an astronomical $50 million. This begs the question, did she really earn that much money from her YouTube career, or does she have other income streams feeding her massive bank account? We were curious, so we did a little research into her career history, and here is what we found. Her early years. Michelle Phan is a native of Massachusetts. Tastes and smells can be a powerful thing, and some foods bring back memories of holidays with the family, of birthday celebrations, and hot summer days that seem to last forever. So, let's take a walk down memory lane and experience some nostalgia. Here's some once popular foods that have just sort of disappeared. Sunny Delight. Remember Sunny D? That ridiculously orange drink that kids clamored for throughout the 80s and 90s? What happened to that stuff, anyway? The tab says Sunny Delight hit shelves in 1968, well before we were really paying attention to things like artificial ingredients. She was born in the city of Boston, although her family moved around a lot. She spent some of her early years in Massachusetts but also lived in California, and in Florida. It was almost insanely popular, and when it hit the UK in 1998 it came in behind only Coke and Pepsi in the drinks market. Her mother and father wanted her to pursue a career in the medical field as a doctor, but this was not what Michelle wanted to do with her life. That's weird, because it was essentially 4 to 5% fruit juice and 95% a watery, super runny corn syrup. Yum. She has long had a passion for art, and with some pleading, her parents allowed her to sign up for courses at Ringling College of Art and Design as well as at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, where she studied illustration and art design. She has a strong work ethic. Michelle is a hard worker, and she even worked as a waitress for a while in 2006. Sunny D's downfall came due to a combination of a few things. During this period of her life, she was very good at applying makeup. The Food Commission, an independent consumer commission in the UK, started to call out manufacturer Procter & Gamble for their misleading advertising that suggested there was some sort of nutritional value to the stuff, when there definitely wasn't. And in 1999, a 5-year-old Welsh girl really did turn a yellowish-orange color after drinking way too much of it. She launched her career as a YouTuber the same year by making makeup video tutorials and posting them to her YouTube channel. That story passed into urban legend territory, but it's completely true, and Sunny D overhauled their recipe and rebranded in an attempt to shake their super unhealthy image. She titled them with catchy phrases including Lady Gaga Poker Face Tutorial, Makeup for Glasses, Romantic Valentine Look, and even one that taught viewers how to make the eyes look larger and brighter with makeup techniques. She was an instant hit. Michelle's makeup tutorials became wildly popular. So far, Shish has amassed more than 1 million subscribers to her YouTube channel, and she has had nearly 600 million views. Michelle Phan became famous as a result. This opened the door to more lucrative endeavors for the young makeup artist. Other opportunities. Due to her immense popularity, Michelle was featured in a variety of magazine articles and other publications. It's still on shelves, but it never really got popular again. Crisco. There was a time when every kitchen had a big tin of Crisco kicking around somewhere. It's what made all those homemade chocolate chip cookies taste so amazing, but unfortunately, we know now that it's horrible for you. She appeared in the Sun Sentinel, in St. Petersburg Times, 17 magazine, Forbes magazine, as well as in Nylon. This was the start of a career as an online influencer. It was just partially hydrogenated vegetable oil processed into a solid, which means it was pretty much a bucket of trans fat. Crisco has changed their recipe since then, says NPR, but it hasn't reclaimed a place in our kitchens. It presented yet more revenue streams.
Lancome, a big makeup company, developed a partnership with her to advertise their makeup by featuring it in her makeup tutorials. More recently, Phan's YouTube channel grew and grew, and recently her subscriber count, which was good at 1 million, has grown to 8 times that size. She now has more than 8 million subscribers and over 1 billion views. Part of the reason for the fall of Crisco is likely the massive shift in how it's been portrayed. NPR says it was first marketed as a super healthy alternative to lard, and even through the 1980s it, and other trans fats, were promoted as much healthier than saturated fats. All that changed in the 1990s, when we started to realize just how bad trans fats are. She also wrote a book that is titled Makeup, Your Life Guide to Beauty, Style, and Success Online and Off. The title was released in 2014. This also helped to contribute to the fortune that she has amassed. Awards Phan is an award-winning YouTuber. Even though the Crisco of today isn't the same as the Crisco of the 80s, it's hard to recover from the devastating findings that your healthy wonder food is slowly clogging your customers' arteries. Pudding Pops were pretty much the perfect treat for those hazy, lazy days of summer vacation. You can't find them today, though, so, what happened? Surprisingly, the disappearance of these doesn't have anything to do with the meteoric downfall of the once beloved celebrity spokesperson who made them famous, Bill Cosby. She was named Best YouTube Guru, winning a Shorty Award in the category, as well as winning a Streamy Award for Inspiration Icon, and she also received multiple nominations for Teen Choice Awards. Culinary lore credits Cosby and Jell-O's 1980s marketing campaign for their huge popularity, and in the first year they logged $100 million in sales. She was also named to the Forbes 30 and Under 30 list as well as Inc.'s 30 and Under list. That tripled in the first 5 years, but the company quickly realized that big sales don't necessarily translate into big profits. The problem was that Jell-O didn't have much experience in the frozen foods business. Producing and distributing a frozen product like Pudding Pops added a ton of overhead that the company could have avoided by sticking to dry products like Jell-O packets. All of this happened between 2014 and 2015. Where did she make her millions? The majority of Michelle Phan's wealth has come from the deals that she cut with Lancome and with L'Oreal hair products. With profit margins tight, Jell-O discontinued the product in the early 90s, before licensing the rights to Popsicle in 2004. After that, they became Popsicle-branded Jell-O Pudding Pops, with an entirely new recipe and a different shape that people just weren't as fond of. Eventually, the new version was also discontinued and Jell-O Pudding Pops vanished from our shelves for good. Candy cigarettes. Given what we know now about the dangers of smoking, it's pretty shocking it wasn't that long ago candy cigarettes were marketed to kids, complete with knockoff packaging that advertised brands like Camel and Winston. It wasn't just an adorable gimmick, either. Mother Jones reports that a 2007 survey done of 25,000 people found those who smoked candy cigarettes as kids were about twice as likely to become adult smokers. The first candy cigarettes were actually chocolate, and they were made by Hershey at the turn of the century. The chalky, more realistic-looking ones came in the 1920s, and they were actually banned by one state, North Dakota, between 1953 and 1967. They were still pretty popular, though, as manufacturers advertised they could make you just like Daddy. They were never actually outlawed. Big Tobacco blocked legislation that would have taken away what was essentially free advertising, but after the truth about smoking came out in the 1980s, parents were suddenly less keen to encourage their kids to pick up a deadly habit. She is now 33 years old and she was just 18 when she started posting her makeup tutorials on YouTube. When her makeup tutorials went viral, she started making bank from the clicks and the views that the advertisements were hauling in. She also established a makeup subscription of her own that she called Ipsy, which has done remarkably well and drastically increased her net worth. It all started with a teenager's blog and a few videos that showed her viewers how to achieve some really cool looks with makeup. You can still get them, technically, but they're called candy sticks. Cottage cheese has a long history, as it dates back to a colonial era when nothing went to waste, not even the leftover milk that was scraped off the cream. It's been pretty consistently produced, but it wasn't until the 1950s that it became super trendy. It was popular for decades, so popular in the 1960s that it was mentioned in Mad Men, and it peaked in the 1970s, says NPR's The Salt.
Americans averaged about 5 pounds a year. It was a common ingredient in other recipes, says The Independent, and more importantly it was eaten alone by the more health-conscious of diners. Somewhere along the line, though, people became less enamored with cottage cheese's weird texture and bland taste. She uploaded her first post in 2005, and from there, things really took off. Part of the problem is likely that it's hard to make a cottage cheese that's consistent, but yogurt? That's much easier to make, much more of a consistent product, and manufacturers have developed so many flavors and types that everyone's bound to find something they like. By 2012 she opened Ipsy, which is now valued at $500 million after raising $100 million in venture capital. Not surprisingly, the more old-fashioned cottage cheese got kicked to the curb. TV dinners. While not many people are reaching in the freezer to pull out a TV dinner these days, they changed the way we eat. They were first developed in the 1950s, and according to The Atlantic, they were created by Swanson as a way to package and sell Thanksgiving leftovers. There's another part of the story, too. The BBC notes they were the brainchild of bacteriologist Betty Cronin, who was inspired by the search for a way to keep business high after the need for supplying wartime rations to the troops ended. They ultimately kick-started our love for everything pre-wrapped, already prepped, and simplified, but then a weird thing happened. Swanson sold 25 million meals the first year their TV dinners hit the shelves, and sales steadily climbed until 2008. It is well on its way to becoming a unicorn company. Phan is an entrepreneur who had no idea that her simple and humble beginnings would end in her becoming a multi-millionaire. That's when sales dropped with such startling speed that Nestlé was ready to unload their frozen food division, valued at around $400 million. Since then, sales have continued to drop or remain flat, and with more and more people valuing freshness over convenience, it seems as though the day of the TV dinner has passed. Congealed salads, which are basically everything and anything from fruit and vegetables to fish and meats encased in jiggly jello, were popular for a long, long time. Her mother and father immigrated to the United States from Vietnam, and Michelle was born in Boston, Massachusetts in April of 1987. Her mom was a manicurist and her dad was a construction worker who also liked to gamble his paycheck. Her family went from being on food stamps and being evicted from several houses to living in the lap of luxury. Final thoughts. Michelle Phan has a remarkable life story, and she stands as an example to other young women that you don't need to have a big bank account to start your own successful business. She did it with a YouTube channel and used her talents to draw in scores of viewers who found her tips useful as well as entertaining. The basic idea has been around since medieval Europe, when it wasn't Jell-O, but gelatin made from calf feet. Serious Eats says there are a few reasons they were popular. They were a practical way to use leftovers, they were versatile, easy, and mess-free, and by the time World War II rolled around, they were a bit of deliciousness in the face of rationing. The Daily Meal adds they were also a bit of a status symbol, because if you could afford the refrigerator you needed to make it, you were doing pretty well. They stayed so popular that by the 1960s, Jell-O released savory flavors like mixed vegetable and celery, but once we moved into the 1970s, congealed salads started heading out. Part of it was convenience, they're actually pretty time-consuming to make, and part of the reason was because even then, we were trying to cut back on sugar. She followed her passions. Like many other entrepreneurs who find huge success, she wasn't chasing the dollar when she started out. You can still find people making Jell-O salads, as they've managed to stay in vogue, particularly in Utah. It was a byproduct of her success in creating video tutorials that people found useful and liked to watch. For the rest of the country, not so much. Orange juice. For decades, fruit juice was an important part of almost everyone's breakfast. In recent years, however, breakfast had changed. Her fame and fortune came naturally as a result of doing what she loved and putting everything that she had into it. In 2014, Quartz reported orange juice sales were particularly hard hit, sinking about 40% over the previous 15 years. Michelle Phan went from being on food stamps to being one of the wealthiest YouTubers around. Hats off to this remarkable young woman for a job well done. 3 years later, they were reporting the trend was continuing in America and in Europe. That's a huge difference from the previous decades.
For around 50 years orange juice was present at most breakfast tables. At its peak, an average of 75% of American households had orange juice in the fridge all the time. The drink's heyday started after World War II, when scientists finally discovered how to process it and get it to your table while making sure it still tasted like oranges. But in the late 1990s, price increases due to insect blight, a decline in the number of people who eat breakfast, and an increased awareness of just how much sugar is in orange juice, started a steady decline. That's presenting some serious problems for Brazil, who produces most of the world's oranges. The decline is so bad that they're looking elsewhere for what they can do to fill the void, and that speaks volumes as to just how out of love we've fallen with this one-time favorite. Kool-Aid. Remember making Kool-Aid on a hot summer day? It was so easy, even the youngest kids could do it. Just dump a ton of sugar into some water, add the packet, and done. It is any wonder we've kind of gotten away from this super sugary, artificially colored drink. There was something else that caused the fall of Kool-Aid, too, and it has nothing to do with sweetness. In 1978, Jim Jones and his followers were front and center in one of the most horrific cult massacres of the century. According to The Atlantic, more 900 people died after drinking a toxic mixture Jones gave them. It was poison, and it was also grape flavor aid. No, it wasn't Kool-Aid, but the tragedy gave rise to the saying, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid," which is basically a warning not to blindly follow leaders that are anywhere from misguided to maniacal. Forbes says the association, even though it's completely wrong, between the Jonestown Massacre and Kool-Aid did some serious damage to Kool-Aid's reputation, and it's one of the heartbreaking reasons you probably don't keep this in your cupboard anymore. Sloppy Joes. If you completely forgot this childhood favorite even existed, you're not alone. Sure, you can still find them occasionally, and there's even at least one gourmet Sloppy Joe food truck out there, but they're nowhere near the weekly dinnertime staple they once were. Eat a Sandwich took to social media to try to find out just when was the last time someone had a Sloppy Joe, and answers varied but hovered around, sometime in the 1990s. No one really knows why they fell off our dinnertime radar, especially considering that many people that were asked remembered them as tasting pretty good. There were a ton of theories, though, and many are legit. It's possible it's a health thing, and they're just too high in sodium for people. The name might be turning people off as adults, and they haven't been targeted with the same kind of makeover foods like grilled cheese have. One response was the simple, straightforward, because we're not 11. Ambrosia salad. Think back to almost every backyard barbecue, cookout, and family reunion you went to as a kid. There were at least a few dishes of ambrosia salad, weren't there? There are a ton of ways to make them, but most involve Jell-O, whipped cream or Cool Whip, cream cheese, and chunky bits from pineapple and oranges to coconut and pecans. Sounds interesting? Serious Eats says ambrosia salad dates back at least to the late 1800s, and adds that it likely became popular because at the time, all those ingredients were special, exotic treats. It became linked with Christmas traditions, and it just sort of stuck around in the South. While there's a small portion of the population, again, mostly in the American South, that is trying to give ambrosia salad a makeover and repopularize it, NPR found many people are just happy this weird stuff is going the way of the dodo. Tapioca pudding. There's a good chance you forgot that tapioca pudding is even a thing, right? The pre-made stuff comes in a tub-like container from the refrigerated section of the grocery store, and it regularly gets passed over these days in favor of more popular snacks like Greek yogurt. You can even find it on the shelf with the individual packs of Jell-O and pudding, but it's usually on the top shelf collecting dust. And even that packaged stuff doesn't hold a candle to the homemade kind that Grandma used to make, so, what happened? It's not entirely clear, but culinary historians and genealogists over at Aunt Lil's Kitchen have recreated some of the recipes from the era before pre-packaged convenience food, and suggest scratch-made tapioca fell from popularity because it was a time-consuming and rather difficult process. We may have made it easier by just opening a package, but with that, we've given up delicious, comforting, homemade goodness. It's just not the same.
According to one writer for the New York Times Magazine, it probably fell out favor for two reasons: most chefs' inabilities to cook it to proper consistency, and the disgusting associations made with it when it's tasted at an improper consistency. Unfortunately, improper cooking was all too common, which is why the pudding earned the nickname fish eye pudding. With a nickname like that, it's no wonder people stopped eating it. Franks and beans. It wasn't long ago that no one had a backyard cookout without a massive tray of Franks and beans. People took it seriously, too. New England nostalgia. In New England Living Today had one writer reminiscing about how important it was to get the beans just right, calling it the secret of not only a great supper, but of a marriage as well. Click Americana looked back at some recipes from the 1960s, and they weren't just for casseroles, they were for sandwiches, too. Franks and beans were easy, affordable, filling, and delicious, so why aren't they a mealtime staple anymore? There might be a few reasons, and one is just that there are so many other ways to eat hot dogs. Food Republic put together a chart of all the different ways people eat hot dogs, and Franks and beans can't hold a candle to some of them, like Memphis's bacon-wrapped dog. In fact, it didn't even make the list. That should tell you a lot about how little this dish is even thought about these days. We're also a little more aware of the consequences of sodium these days, and the University of Wyoming notes that canned beans and hot dogs are both pretty high in sodium. Maybe it's the health-conscious crowd that's taken this tasty staple away? Hi-C. The ever-popular, ever-coveted Ecto-Cooler was finally discontinued in 2001 after an impressively long run, aside from a brief reappearance for the Ghostbuster reboot. But as much as we all miss the Ecto-Cooler, we're still not buying many of the juice boxes Hi-C carries. Business Wire says sales of kids' beverages have been on the decline since at least 2008, and there are a few reasons for that. Healthy Children warns parents about the sugar content in kids' drinks, and one little box of Hi-C Wild Cherry contains 27 grams of sugar. That's more than the American Heart Association recommends for an adult woman have in a whole day. And Romper points out they're not exactly environmentally friendly, either. A juice box can take 300 years, at least, to disintegrate, and anyone who wants to set a good example for their kids is opting for reusable containers. McDonald's had a hand in forcing us all to stop drinking Hi-C, too, more accurately called Hi-C Orange Lavaburst, when they decided to stop carrying it in 2017. Business Insider says social media was outraged, but adds that McDonald's doesn't care what you think. Bubble tape. You still probably remember some of the most popular bubble gums you traded with your friends and had taken away quite a few times, even if you've outgrown them. Like bubble tape. Who's going to whip out a roll of bubble tape at the office? You totally should and could, though, because you can still buy it under the name Hubba Bubba Bubble Tape. Even more surprising is the fact that fruit stripe gum is still around, too. It's not easy to find, but if you're in the mood for a bit of gum that's full of the same short-lived flavor you remember but still love, it's out there. So is Bubble Yum, the super sweet, super fruity gum that suffered briefly from the strange rumor it was made with spiders' legs and eggs. Snopes confirms it's not true, if you needed clarification. It's understandable but sad that we don't enjoy these fun gums anymore now that we're adulting, but even the kids aren't chewing these gums much. What happened here? It's likely these 80s and 90s favorites were pushed aside when we realized sugar-free gum wasn't terrible, and that we could chomp away without giving ourselves a side of tooth decay. Awful. When we talk about awful, we're talking about some of the dishes your grandparents and great-grandparents probably survived on. Those are things like liver and onions, steak and kidney pie, tripe, and sometimes even brains. We don't really need to say why these fell out of fashion, right? They're absolutely not in line with almost anything in today's palate, and the idea of eating kidneys is just, well, gross. But offal was a staple during times when nothing went to waste, and was popular more recently than you might expect. According to The Atlantic, there was a huge push during World War II to make eating offal standard American fare. Times were tight, meat was rationed, and a huge amount was going overseas to feed Allied troops. On the home front, the government recruited the help of social psychologists to help make offal more appealing to the masses, and it worked. Kind of. That's probably why your grandparents stirred kidneys into stews, but it's also likely that once we had abundant access to things like hamburgers and steak, we quickly abandoned the inner icky bits.